I met Daniel Carter in my early 30s. I wasn't anyone special, at least not by his family standards. I was a nurse working double shifts, renting a small two-bedroom apartment just outside Raleigh, and still paying off my student loans. Daniel, on the other hand, was the only son of the Carters, a family known in town for their spotless image, country club memberships, and the successful hardware business his grandfather had built from the ground up. We met at a charity event at the hospital. He was charming, warm, a little awkward with his words, which I found oddly endearing. I didn't think someone like him would be interested in someone like me, but he pursued me gently, with kindness, and never made me feel small. That came later. We were married a year and a half later in a quiet ceremony I insisted on paying half for. His mother, Patricia Carter, didn't speak to me for the entire reception. She smiled for the photos, but pulled Daniel aside so often I had to cut the cake alone. When I looked back at those pictures later, I saw the beginning of what I had ignored. Patricia never raised her voice. She didn't have to. She asked pointed questions. She commented on my modest clothing and asked if I'd be returning to work after the wedding with a tight smile. I kept quiet, out of respect, and because Daniel always told me not to take it personally. "She's hard on everyone," he'd say. But I noticed she never spoke that way to Daniel's cousin Lauren, who had a lawyer's degree and a closet full of pearls. At first, I thought it would pass. I thought if I showed her I wasn't after their money, if I worked hard, kept the house clean, and stayed respectful, she'd come around. Instead, it got worse. She'd drop by unannounced and rearrange the furniture. She helped by replacing my cookware with things she picked out herself. Once, she mailed me a cookbook with the note, "These should be more suitable for Daniel's tastes." Daniel told me to laugh it off. "That's just how she is. Don't let her get under your skin." But he never defended me. Not once. The final blow came when I overheard her in the hallway during our 4th wedding anniversary dinner. I was putting on perfume upstairs. She didn't know I was home early from my shift. "She's not good enough for you," Patricia whispered to Daniel. "She's dragging you down. You deserve someone who'll help you move forward, not someone stuck in place. It's not too late to fix this, sweetheart." I stood frozen in the hallway, perfume bottle still in hand. When Daniel didn't respond, when he didn't say a word in my defense, I walked back into the bedroom and closed the door softly. I didn't say anything that night. I simply smiled at dinner. But I didn't forget. That night, after our anniversary dinner, I lay in bed next to Daniel, listening to the slow rhythm of his breath. He fell asleep easily, as if the evening had been perfect, as if nothing was wrong. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how a man could let someone speak so cruelly about his wife and do nothing. The next morning, I went about my routine, made breakfast, fed our golden retriever, packed my bag for work. I said nothing, but something had shifted inside me. Not anger, something colder, like a string had been cut. At work, I poured myself into my patients. It was the only place where I felt seen, needed. The hospital was chaotic, loud, full of pain and small miracles. And it was mine. No one questioned if I belonged there. My supervisor, Marlene, had once called me the backbone of the ward. I clung to that more than I realized. On my lunch break, I found myself staring at the coffee in my thermos, not drinking it. I started thinking about the things I'd let slide, the little humiliations. Patricia calling me dear with that sickly sweet tone. Daniel dismissing my worries like I was overreacting. I started to wonder when I stopped being a partner in my own marriage and became a piece of furniture, useful, quiet, and easy to ignore. The next Sunday, we were invited to Patricia's house for dinner. I didn't want to go, but Daniel insisted. "She's trying," he said. "You know how she is." I almost laughed at the irony of it. "Yes," I said. "I know exactly how she is." Her house was like a museum, immaculate, stiff, cold. Patricia greeted us at the door in a lavender blouse and pearls, her smile tight. She hugged Daniel and barely acknowledged me. Dinner was roasted duck, asparagus, and a wine I couldn't pronounce. I complimented the food. Patricia tilted her head. "Thank you. I thought it would be a nice change. I know your tastes tend to run simpler." Daniel winced. I waited. Nothing. After dinner, she asked Daniel to help her move something in the garage. I stayed behind in the dining room, pretending to sip wine. That's when her friend Lorraine, someone I barely knew, turned to me and said, "You must be very brave." I blinked. "Sorry?" "To marry into this family," she said, eyes gleaming. "Patricia told me you came from a more humble background. Must be a challenge to fit in here." I smiled tightly. "Not really. I just focus on making a life worth living." She chuckled politely, but I saw it. I saw it in Patricia's eyes when she returned. That flicker of disdain. The same look I'd seen in patients who thought they were too important to bleed. That was the night I knew. I would never be enough for her, no matter what I did. So I stopped trying. But I didn't leave. Not yet. I started to observe. Instead, I paid attention to things I had previously ignored. How Patricia managed her social ties, who she called when something needed fixing, how Daniel's finances were tied up in his family's business. I learned who held the keys and who could change the locks. Once I stopped trying to please Patricia, something strange happened. I saw everything more clearly. It was like wiping fog off a mirror. I saw how she wrapped Daniel around her fingers with quiet manipulations, how he sought her approval like a child desperate for praise. He'd take her advice over mine in everything: finances, home repairs, even small things like which wine to buy for guests, and she gave him that advice freely, always couched as care, never control. But I saw it. I finally saw it. I started keeping a journal, not for feelings. Those were too raw, too complicated, but for facts. Dates, conversations, patterns. When she visited, what she said, what Daniel did afterward. I even tracked the tone of his mood. It helped me understand how her presence bled into our marriage like ink in water. At the hospital, Marlene noticed I'd become more focused. "You seem sharper lately," she said one evening, "like you're watching for something." I shrugged and smiled. "Maybe I am." One night, Daniel came home with news. "Mom wants us to come to the lake house for Labor Day weekend, just family." Family. I didn't want to go, but I went. I had started saying yes more often, not out of submission, but because I needed to see everything for myself. The lake house was exactly what you'd expect. Beige walls, framed landscapes, throw pillows stitched with words like gather and grace. Patricia was in her element, setting the table, delegating tasks to Lauren, correcting me gently on how to fold linen napkins. Daniel barely looked at me that weekend. He wasn't cruel, he was distracted. Like being with his mother turned him into someone else. A son first, a husband, barely. The real moment came on Sunday night. I was on the porch, alone, watching the water. Patricia came out quietly and stood next to me. I didn't move. "You know," she said softly, "marriage doesn't have to be so difficult. If it feels like work all the time, maybe it's not the right fit." I turned to her. "What exactly are you trying to say?" She smiled, serene. "You're not from this world, dear. You're not one of us. I think you know that. And I think Daniel knows it too. Eventually, he'll realize what he needs. I just hope you're wise enough to step aside with dignity when that time comes." I didn't flinch. I didn't answer. She went back inside, and I stayed out there for a long time. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from clarity. After that night at the lake, I stopped doubting myself. I still went through the motions at home. I still cooked dinner, did laundry, made small talk when Daniel remembered to ask how my day had been. But my mind was elsewhere now. I wasn't thinking about how to fix my marriage. I was watching it from the outside, like a structure already cracking under its own weight. I started staying later at the hospital, picking up extra shifts. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed the space. Space to think, to breathe. Marlene noticed. "Everything okay at home?" she asked one night. "Everything's exactly as it's always been," I said with a smile. "And that's the problem." She gave me a long look. "You deserve better, you know." I nodded, but I wasn't looking for better. Not yet. I was looking for leverage. It was around this time that Daniel started pulling away too, but for a different reason. He became secretive, nervous. He stayed out late under the excuse of business meetings or dinners with his college buddies. When I asked casually who he'd been with, he became defensive. "Why do you always interrogate me?" he snapped once. "You never used to be like this." He was right. I hadn't been like this. I used to trust him. One Thursday evening, he left his phone on the kitchen counter while showering. I didn't go looking for anything, but a text popped up and it caught my eye. "She still doesn't know? You're playing with fire, Dee." No name, just a number. I didn't open the thread. I didn't need to. It wasn't proof of anything yet, not technically, but it was enough to change my posture. Something was happening behind my back, and now I knew it. When Daniel returned, I smiled and kissed him on the cheek. "Everything okay?" I asked. He paused. "Of course. Why?" "Just checking," I said, turning back to the dishes. The next day, I made a quiet appointment with a lawyer. Not for divorce, not yet. Just to understand my position. I learned that everything Daniel had was tied to his family's trust. He didn't own his car. The house was technically in his mother's name. Even his savings were managed through a Carter family holdings account. That was when it hit me. Patricia hadn't just kept control of Daniel emotionally. She'd kept him financially dependent too. All his confidence, all his arrogance. It was borrowed. He was a prince in a kingdom he didn't own. And if she ever turned on him, he'd have nothing. That knowledge didn't make me feel powerful yet. It made me cautious. Because if Patricia ever saw me as a true threat, she could destroy me and him in the same stroke. But she underestimated me. She thought I was passive. I decided to let her keep thinking that, for now. 2 weeks passed after the text message, and Daniel grew increasingly erratic. He was moody, distracted, constantly on edge. He checked his phone like a teenager and shut down conversations the second they got personal. He wasn't cruel, he was avoidant. Distant in a way that made silence louder than arguments. I said nothing. I cooked his favorite meals, smiled when he came home, and kissed him goodnight. Not because I loved him, not anymore, but because I needed him calm and unaware. One Sunday afternoon, I suggested we visit his parents. "You haven't seen your mother in a while," I said, casually folding laundry. "I'm sure she misses you." He blinked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You want to go to my parents' house?" "Of course," I said, shrugging. "It's been too long." I watched his shoulders ease. That'd mean a lot to her. He didn't realize it wasn't about her. It was about him and how he behaved around her. I needed more information, and I got it. Patricia was all smiles when we arrived, hugging Daniel and giving me her usual brittle welcome. She served wine and brought out a tray of lemon tarts she claimed were Daniel's favorite. He hadn't mentioned them once in 10 years of marriage. After lunch, she and Daniel retreated to her study, as they often did. I stayed in the kitchen with Harold, Daniel's father, who rarely spoke. He liked the crossword puzzles in the Sunday paper more than people. But that day, he surprised me. He folded his paper and looked at me squarely. "You planning to leave him?" I nearly dropped the glass I was rinsing. "I'm sorry?" "Daniel, you planning to leave him?" I dried my hands slowly. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged. "You're smart. You don't flinch. Patricia's thrown everything she has at you, and you haven't cracked. That scares her more than anything." I sat down across from him. "And you?" He looked out the window, jaw tight. "I stopped trying to fight her years ago. I don't blame you for still having the energy." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. When Daniel and Patricia returned, she was practically glowing. Daniel looked lighter. He kissed her on the cheek and said something about putting plans in motion. That night, after we got home, Daniel poured himself a drink and asked, "Have you ever thought about what you'd do if this marriage didn't work out?" I looked at him, steady. "Sure. But then I remind myself, everything I've worked for is here. I wouldn't walk away from it lightly." He nodded, thoughtful. "That's what I told Mom, too." So he'd spoken about our potential divorce with her, behind my back, and not just once. I smiled faintly. "Good. I'm glad you're talking things through." Inside, though, I began to understand something else. Patricia wasn't just trying to push me out. She was preparing Daniel to get rid of me. The next few weeks were oddly peaceful. Daniel was more pleasant, as if talking about the end of our marriage had lifted some pressure off his shoulders. He cracked jokes, brought home flowers once, even cooked dinner. It was all an illusion, and I didn't fall for it. Patricia was still behind the curtain, pulling strings. One evening, I decided to check our joint account, a thing I hadn't done in months. The balance was far lower than expected. Thousands missing. Transfers marked business-related had been made over the past month, all to the Carter family holdings account. I didn't say anything. Instead, I scheduled another quiet meeting with the attorney I'd seen before, a woman named Michelle Rains. She was calm, methodical, and not easily impressed by theatrics. She looked over the records I'd brought, screenshots, printouts, photos of account statements. "Looks like he's preparing for something," she said flatly. "Trying to consolidate assets before a formal separation. You need to move fast." I nodded. "I want to do this carefully, quietly." Michelle looked up at me, surprised. "Most women come in here angry, emotional." "I already spent years giving them that," I replied. "Now I'm thinking clearly." She advised I start documenting every financial transaction, every sign of manipulation. I already had most of it. "You've done more prep than most people do after filing," she said. On my way home from the meeting, I drove by Patricia's house. The lights were on in the study. Daniel's car was parked out front. I kept driving. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner for some old nursing colleagues. I made chicken marsala, lit candles, set the table with real linen. Daniel stayed upstairs the whole time. He said he had a headache. I think he just didn't want to be around people who liked me for who I was. After everyone left, I cleaned up slowly, humming a song from college. It was the first evening I felt like myself again, separate from the Carters, from their shadows. The next morning, Daniel surprised me with coffee in bed. "I was thinking," he said, too casually. "Maybe we could try a short break. You go stay with a friend or something. Clear our heads." I looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Is that what your mother suggested?" He froze. "What?" I smiled. "You should talk to her about being more subtle." He got up and left the room, the tray still on my lap. The following Monday, I began moving pieces. Quietly, deliberately. I opened a new bank account in my name only and started shifting my paychecks there. I stopped using our joint account entirely. I scheduled a session with a financial advisor recommended by Michelle, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carla who didn't blink when I explained my situation. She reviewed everything I had. "You've done your homework," she said, "and you've got time. That's a rare advantage." "I'm not in a rush," I told her. "I want him to think I'm still deciding." Back at home, I played the part. I let Daniel believe we were working through things. He floated the idea of couples counseling, half-hearted and weeks too late, and I nodded like I might consider it. At night, I stayed up, reading legal guides and financial blogs, educating myself on everything women wished they'd known before the separation papers were served. I felt myself hardening, not bitter, but focused. There was no grief left for the man sleeping next to me. Then, one evening, Patricia called me. She rarely called directly. It was always through Daniel, or in person. But this time, her voice came clear and sharp through the receiver. "I think it's time we had a real conversation," she said. "I'm listening," I replied, though I already knew where it was going. "You've done well. I'll admit, I underestimated you. But this family, our name, it needs to be protected. Daniel's future can't be compromised because of a misaligned partnership." I said nothing. She continued, "If you walk away now, quietly, there will be a generous settlement, something to thank you for your time. But if this gets messy, well, you know how messy things can ruin reputations." I almost laughed. "You mean yours?" A pause. Then a colder tone. "I'm offering you dignity." "No," I said, calmly. "You're offering me a bribe." She hung up. I wrote down the time and date of the call. I recorded the entire conversation, and I sent it to Michelle the next morning. That was the moment things shifted. Not publicly, yet, but privately, inside me. For the first time since all of this began, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was preparing to win. 3 days after the phone call, I served Daniel with separation papers. He didn't see it coming. He stood frozen in the doorway, the manila envelope still in his hand, mouth slightly open like he'd forgotten how to speak. "I thought we were working through this," he finally muttered. I didn't smile. "You thought I was staying quiet." He stared at me, unsure whether to be angry or afraid. "You blindsided me. You started shifting money months ago, Daniel. Don't pretend we were ever working on anything but your escape plan." That night, he slept on the couch. The next morning, he left for Patricia's house. He didn't say goodbye. I wasn't expecting one. I met with Michelle later that week to review the next steps. The recording of Patricia's call would be enough leverage to avoid a courtroom battle, for now. "She'll want to settle this quickly," Michelle said. "She won't risk a legal record of threats, especially with her reputation." "But I don't want just a settlement," I told her. "I want them to feel it." Michelle's brow lifted, just slightly. "Then we'll do this carefully, publicly, if necessary." Meanwhile, Daniel's mask began to crack. He sent a string of long texts. Not angry ones, pitiful ones. "I'm sorry." I panicked. "Mom said you'd leave anyway." Followed by, "This doesn't have to be ugly." And later, "Can we meet for coffee? Just talk?" I didn't respond. Instead, I filed a formal request for financial disclosure through Michelle. She sent the paperwork directly to Patricia's office, not Daniel. 2 days later, I received an email from a private account with attached documents, more than I asked for. It was a full breakdown of the Carter Family Trust, including a confidential letter from Harold to Patricia, dated 6 years ago. In it, Harold warned her against weaponizing the business against Daniel's wife. I recognized the sender's email, Harold C. 7781. So Harold had chosen a side. I didn't reply, but I printed the letter, added it to the binder where I kept everything: account statements, legal memos, screenshots, transcripts. What had once been a journal of pain was now a record of my power. That weekend, I drove out to a small rental cabin on the outskirts of town. I needed air, space. I sat by the lake with a glass of wine, letting the silence wash over me. And I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who used to flinch every time Patricia offered advice with a smile. When I returned home Monday morning, there was a message on the answering machine. It was Patricia. "You've made your point. Let's talk, privately, like adults. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I deleted it. The media didn't pick it up right away, which I was grateful for. This wasn't a scandal yet, but that changed quickly. Michelle had filed a motion to freeze shared marital assets, just in case Patricia or Daniel tried to move more funds under the radar. It was a procedural move, but word got out. Within a week, a local business column ran a quiet piece titled "Dispute Within Carter Family Holdings," amid divorce proceedings. It was buried on page 6, but in Patricia's world, that was front-page humiliation. The next morning, she stormed into my workplace. She didn't make a scene, she was too trained for that. But she stood in the hallway outside the nurses' lounge, waiting like a queen in exile. "I'd like a word," she said when I passed. I didn't stop walking. "You can speak to my attorney." "You don't understand what you're doing," she hissed behind me. I turned slowly. "You're right. I underestimated myself. I thought I'd break under you, but I didn't." She blinked, stunned for the first time in years. I left her standing there. That night, Daniel showed up at the house. No call, no text, just knocked on the door like he still belonged there. He looked tired, less arrogant, more lost. "I just want to talk," he said. I let him in, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to see if he had the courage to face the truth. He sat at the kitchen table, same place we'd had hundreds of meals. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "I thought you'd walk away, take the offer, start over." "You mean disappear?" I said. His jaw clenched. "You made it public. You made her look bad." "No, Daniel, she did that. I just stopped covering for her." He was quiet. Then, for the first time in years, he looked small. "She told me I had to choose, that you were holding me back." I leaned on the counter. "You're a grown man. You made your choice. Now you live with it." He swallowed. "Can we just split it quietly now? Make it stop?" I shook my head. It's already too late. The next day, Michelle filed a formal petition to subpoena all internal financial communications between Daniel, Patricia, and the family trust. That same week, Harold's letter, previously confidential, was anonymously leaked to a regional legal blog. The headline was direct: Carter family matriarch accused of using wealth to coerce daughter-in-law out of marriage. The post didn't name me, but everyone knew. Within hours, local reporters were calling the hospital. I gave them nothing, but I walked a little taller that day. Daniel stopped texting, Patricia went quiet, and I, after years of being talked over, dismissed, and condescended to, finally felt heard. 2 months after filing the motion for financial discovery, we reached a settlement, but not on their terms. Patricia wanted it sealed, of course. She offered another dignified payout, double the first one if I'd agree to confidentiality. Michelle didn't even bother to ask my opinion before rejecting it. Instead, we proceeded. Through discovery, we confirmed that Daniel had knowingly shifted marital funds in violation of preliminary agreements. Patricia had signed off on them personally. Michelle pressed hard. With enough documentation to prove intent and coercion, we had the basis for more than a civil case. We had the skeleton of a fraud investigation. Suddenly, Patricia changed her tune. Her lawyers called for mediation. It was held at a neutral office. White walls, cold coffee, uncomfortable chairs. Patricia arrived in black, not pearls. Her makeup was heavier than usual. Daniel sat next to her, pale and hollow. I sat across from them in a calm beige blouse, no jewelry, no makeup. Just my file folders, my lawyer, and the silence that had once been their weapon. Now it was mine. The terms we agreed to were fair, at least on paper. A generous financial settlement. My own home, not the one we'd lived in, but a newer one that I chose. A letter signed by both Daniel and Patricia, acknowledging inappropriate financial conduct that I could release publicly if they violated the agreement. But what mattered more wasn't written down. It was the look in Patricia's eyes when she realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. It was the way Daniel couldn't even meet my gaze as he signed the papers. It was the quiet satisfaction of walking out of that office and knowing I had not only survived them, I had outmaneuvered them. I returned to work full-time. Marlene hugged me the day I came back. "You look different," she said. "I am," I told her. "I'm finally myself again." I bought a cottage on the outskirts of town, quiet, with a little garden out back. I planted lavender and tomatoes, and each morning I had coffee with the sun on my shoulders. Sometimes I saw Patricia's friends at the grocery store. They looked away. Some whispered. Others offered small, tight smiles, but no one dared say what they used to. I was no longer Daniel's wife. I was me, and I'd made it through. One afternoon, Harold mailed me a letter, handwritten this time. "You deserved better from all of us," it read. "I hope you find peace. You've earned it." I folded the letter gently and placed it in my desk drawer. And then I went out to the garden, barefoot and unburdened. The sun was warm. The air smelled like rosemary and earth. I smiled,